Hello and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to make a summer dish, a very simple food from Italy that was introduced to me by a former colleague of mine from near Venice. The dish is pasta pomodoro. Literally means pasta with tomatoes. Now this dish is a very simple dish. It's a light dish for summer. It's also a very cheap dish that students make. But it's delightful. There's some sophistication to it. And we'll talk about exactly how to get the dish the way you like it and how to kind of make sure that it comes out as the sort of classy, tasty dish that it can be. The ingredients of this dish couldn't be simpler. We have pasta. In this case, I got some egg noodles that are spiral pasta. You can use any kind of medium pasta, but it's better if it sticks to the stuff around it. So in this case, like a spiral pasta or a penne or rigatoni with that's not completely smooth on the surface. Those are all great choices. Maybe farfalle is not the best, and the long ribbon noodles, maybe stay away from them for this particular dish. As the name would suggest, we also have tomatoes, although I probably won't use that many. I then have onions, salt, and olive oil. That's all. The first step is to julienne some onions. Let's see how bad that is. All right, I think that's okay. But I think I'm actually going to put in a bit more onion just because I've had to cut a big part of this one out. For onions, of course, first thing is peel. And then we will julienne and immediately put in the pot. One of the things that people often struggle with regarding onions is the fact that their eyes burn. Now, the way to avoid eyes burning is fairly simple. The burning of the eyes comes from chemicals that come out of the onion when it's cut. So, keep the onion together, throw it in the pot. And then I'll do the same thing with the other two onions. So I decided, after all, to only use 2 onions, so it's basically an onion and 3/4. 2 onions would still be fine, but we're going to just use this. I'm afraid if I put 3 onions in, that the onion flavors will sort of come to the fore. So now I'm going to turn this on high until it starts to sizzle. Then I will immediately turn it down. And I will cook these onions very slowly until they just start to brown. Then we'll add the tomatoes. Once the onions are sizzling, I'll come back and we'll start to cut the tomatoes. So now the onions are sizzling. I'm going to go ahead and stir them around a bit. I've turned the stove down to 4. That's on a scale of 1 to 10. And now I'm just going to stir these for a while until they become pretty soft. Once they become pretty soft, I will start cutting my tomatoes. But in the meantime, I'm going to start adding a little bit of salt. That's just a small amount of salt, maybe a teaspoon, and that can cook with these onions. I will come back and add more salt once the tomatoes are cooking. You can see here the onions are starting to become translucent. they will start to brown in some more time. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to start to cut the tomatoes now, and I'll show you how that's done. Now, usually I like to cut the tomatoes this way. I usually like to dice them. And by the way, it's really helpful to have really nice sharp knives when cutting tomatoes. Some people prefer to have like a dedicated tomato slicer. I just try to keep my chef knife sharp enough. I'm going to cut a bunch of tomatoes like this. I'm actually going to cook a lot of pasta because I like this dish cold as well as warm, and it can also be warmed up quite nicely. So now these onions are starting to get sticky and starting to brown. So I'm going to let them go for just a little longer, and then I'm going to add my tomatoes. And I just weighed these. It's about 650 grams of tomatoes. So I'm going to get a fair bit out of this. So give it another couple minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to start on my pasta water. So we'll be back in a couple minutes, and I will start to add the tomatoes. So now you can see that the onions are yellow, starting to brown. I think this is looking really good. I'm going to start to add my tomatoes. And then this will cook slowly. So I'd say about one medium onion to maybe 300 grams of tomatoes. And we're going to go ahead and let this cook. Now, as this starts, so at this point I'm going to turn it way up. So I'm going to turn it up to maybe a 7. And that's going to help to start to cook these tomatoes down. I'm also going to add more salt. Previous salt was there for helping the onions cook. Now we're actually going to season. And I'm going to go ahead and let this cook. Now this sauce is not a ragu. Ragu refers to basically a meat stew based sauce. This is just cooked tomatoes. So this is more of a sumo. Sorry, not sumo, sugo. It's difficult when I have to try to understand both Spanish and Italian, and occasionally say words that are half one and half the other. Anyway, this will cook for a while. My pasta water's on. I'll come back when it gets hot. So this is cooking now for just a few minutes, and I wanted to show you something, which is this juice piling up at the bottom. Now, the Italian word for this sort of vegetarian sauce is sugo, which comes from the same root as jugo in Mexican Spanish, which means juice. So when we talk about a sugo, we're talking about a juice-based sauce, while if we are talking about a ragu, we are talking about a meat stew-based sauce. So that's just an interesting observation. You can see that as this cooks, the juice comes out. And that's completely and totally expected. Now that this is boiling hard and starting to really liquefy, I've turned it down from like a 7 back down to a 4. And we're going to go ahead and let this cook a bit. It's not going to take that long. You can see that the tomatoes are disintegrating into what's basically juice. So my sauce is boiling nicely, and my pasta water is starting to boil. So I'm going to salt it nicely. Always salt this well. And we'll go ahead and let that fully dissolve, bring to a boil again, and then I'll add my pasta. So now my sugo is coming together nicely. I have my water here. I've salted it well. Remember, we salt the water well so that we can get nice flavor in the pasta. I'm going to now add the egg noodles. Stir them around a little bit, and I will let them cook. It'll be about 8 minutes. I'll be back in about 8 minutes, maybe a little bit less, when the noodles are nicely al dente, and then I will drain them. We'll go ahead and mix the sugo with the noodles, and I will present. Okay, so I now have my pasta here, my sugo there, and I'm just going to start pouring it in and stirring it in. Hopefully I have enough sugo. Yeah, this should be okay. It's a little bit on the light side in terms of tomatoes, but it will do. Yeah, this will be okay. It's good. Let me scoop the rest out. Now, I prefer to have the sauce just slightly undersalted. It should be a fairly salty sauce anyway, because as you can see, there's not a huge amount of tomato. And even if there was, it's a fairly runny sauce, and it would all run off. So now I have this here. I'm going to take a plate. And scoop some out, and then I will go ahead and present. You can see that even as it is, I wouldn't want that much more sauce because it would all run off. Top with a seasoning cheese. Again, vegetable peelers are your friend. Except I don't really like that this has wandered away from the center of the plate. Oh well. I guess if I was going to be super picky about presentation, I'd put it on a new plate right now. But, c'est la vie. The other option would be to take some pieces of bread. And here we have pasta pomodoro. I decided to put tomatoes on the side rather than bread. Bread would work, but in this case I just decided tomatoes would be better. I'm going to add just a little more cheese here, and we can take a kind of a picture of it. Just move that off to the side. There we have our dish. And so here we have our pasta pomodoro. The flavors are lively and light. The dish itself is quite delicious. So invite you to come and try and make it yourself. If you have questions, feel free to ask me in the comments or otherwise. And enjoy this delightful summer pasta.